Have you ever felt like the rules of society just uh, changed overnight?
Oh, yeah, like nobody gave you the memo.
Exactly, like you went to sleep in one world.
A world where just keeping your head down was enough.
Right. Doing your job, minding your own business. And then you wake up in another world entirely, where your silence is suddenly treated as an offense.
It's a jarring feeling for a lot of people.
It really is. And today, we are exploring a highly polarizing and explosive new ebook that claims to explain exactly why that happened.
And how it happened.
Yes. Welcome, as always, to another deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us today as we navigate some incredibly complex and, frankly, fascinating waters.
It's going to be an intense one.
But before we get started, please hit the like and subscribe buttons right now to support the deep dive. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep analytical conversations.
Definitely.
And I want to mention right up top that today's source material, which is a full-length ebook, can be found and purchased right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
So if you want to dive into the architecture of the culture war, you are going to want to see these arguments for yourself.
Highly recommend checking it out. So let's set the stage. The book is called Woke Celebration.
And that subtitle is important.
Right. It's from intolerance of degeneracy to tolerance, acceptance, celebration, and enforced participation
Published in 2025.
by an author named Conrad Riker. And right from the preface, Riker makes absolutely no secret of who he is writing for.
No, he doesn't.
His explicit target audience is men. Specifically, he is writing for men's rights activists, the red-pilled community, and men in the broader manosphere.
Guys who feel entirely alienated, marginalized, and just left behind by modern cultural shifts.
Exactly. The book is essentially pitched as a survival guide
A tactical breakdown, really.
for men who want to understand the history of our institutions before they were, and this is in the author's words, captured by feminists and Marxists.
And right here is where we need to jump in with a crucial mandatory disclaimer for you, the listener.
Yes, please.
Before we unpack this, we need to be crystal clear. This book contains highly politically charged content.
Very charged.
It touches on intense left-wing and right-wing ideologies, gender politics, and major culture war flashpoints. Our mission today is never to take sides.
Never.
We are impartially reporting on the contents of Riker's book. We are not endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Right. We are simply acting as your guides.
Just helping you understand the arguments, the historical tracing, and the specific ideas exactly as the author presents them to his intended audience.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the overarching premise of Riker's book is highly systematic.
And he's very methodical.
He argues that society didn't just accidentally drift into these current cultural norms.
It wasn't a natural, organic evolution of empathy over time.
No. Instead, he claims we were pushed through a very specific, highly engineered pipeline.
And the stages of that pipeline are right there in the subtitle.
Let's walk through them. It starts with tolerance. You're asked to just tolerate something different.
People live how they want to live,
Right. Then it moves to acceptance.
where you have to accept it as morally and socially equal to traditional norms.
Then it shifts to celebration.
You must actively cheer for it, designate months to it, fly flags for it.
And finally, the stage he says we are in right now, enforced participation.
What's fascinating here is how Riker declares that neutrality is dead,
The idea that you can just opt out.
gone. In this new paradigm, he argues, you are no longer allowed to simply say, I don't care, I'm just going to focus on my own life.
Silence is now actively treated as violence.
Yes. And opting out of the celebration is treated as bigotry. The absence of enthusiastic participation is viewed by institutional structures as a direct threat to the culture.
Let's look at how he illustrates this, because he uses specific examples that really ground the theory. The first one that stood out to me is what he calls the case of Dave the janitor.
Oh, the mop closet case.
Yes. According to the text, Dave was a blue-collar worker at an elementary school in Ontario. Riker describes him as a guy who just wants to clean the floors, collect his paycheck, and go home to his family.
Sounds pretty standard.
But Dave gets fired.
Fired.
And the reason? He refused to decorate his mop closet with pride flags.
Not a classroom.
Not a public hallway where students gather. A mop closet.
And this is where Riker's analysis gets into the mechanics of institutional power. You might ask, why does the school board care about a mop closet?
Right. Who's even looking in there?
Exactly. Riker argues that the mop closet represents the last bastion of private, unmonitored thought for that employee.
Wow.
The administration didn't need the closet decorated for the students' benefit. They needed Dave's submission.
The act of forcing him to decorate his private workspace is an exercise in breaking individual autonomy.
Precisely. When he refused, he didn't just break a decorating rule, he committed the heresy of non-participation.
It makes you wonder about the labor dynamics there. I mean, 10 or 20 years ago, wouldn't a labor union have immediately stepped in?
You would think so.
They'd protect a blue-collar worker from being fired over a political decoration.
That's a vital piece of the puzzle Riker addresses. He argues that traditional labor unions, which used to focus entirely on class struggle, wages, and worker protections, have been entirely captured by the same ideological framework.
So they changed their focus.
Completely. In his view, union leadership has traded class advocacy for identity politics.
So when Dave is fired,
His union doesn't see a worker being exploited by management. They see an ideological dissident who is making the workplace unsafe through his lack of celebration.
the shield that was supposed to protect him is now part of the sword.
It's a total inversion.
That represents a significant structural shift in how workplace protections operate. And Riker builds a massive catalog of these instances to argue this isn't an isolated HR glitch.
It's a systemic feature.
Right. He points to a San Francisco salon owner in 2021. This is a 68-year-old Vietnamese grandmother.
She had run her small nail salon for 25 years.
Under a specific city ordinance for 124 or 21 small businesses were required to display pride flags.
So face a fine.
A fine of $500 a day.
To understand the legal justification here, Riker points out how the city utilized bureaucratic loopholes.
Now so.
The ordinance was framed under community cohesion and anti-discrimination mandates.
Okay.
When the salon owner refused, stating she serves everyone and doesn't care who they love, but she didn't come to America to be forced to fly symbols she doesn't understand.
The city didn't back down.
Not at all. She was fined $1,500 in 3 days and officially labeled a hate actor.
Let's pause on that phrase, hate actor. How does a grandmother giving manicures suddenly get legally classified as a hate actor?
Riker explains that the definition of hate has been fundamentally redefined by these institutions.
It's not about malice anymore.
No. Hate no longer requires an action of malice or denial of service. Under this new framework, hate is defined as the refusal to affirm.
Just opting out.
Yes. Because she wouldn't fly the flag, her neutrality was processed by the municipal code as an act of hostility.
Which brings us to another municipal example he uses. Austin, Texas in 2023. City employees were mandated to attend pride events.
And if you didn't show up,
You faced disciplinary action. Riker points out that absence was officially categorized as hostile workplace behavior.
the logic being if you don't celebrate, you are discriminating.
If we connect this to the bigger picture Riker is painting, he is saying that the enforcers of this new order have completely inverted Title VII workplace protections.
Title VII was originally designed to ensure you couldn't be fired for your race, religion, or sex.
It was a shield.
Riker argues it has been turned into a weapon to strip away the concept of individual conscience. He specifically notes that many of these penalized employees are men.
Blue-collar workers, maintenance staff, clerks.
Men who are suddenly caught in an ideological purity test that has absolutely nothing to do with their actual job competence or how they treat their peers.
So if the workplace and local governments are enforcing this, the natural question you have to ask is, how did we get here?
How did the institutions flip so completely?
From demanding neutrality to demanding celebration. Riker spends a massive portion of the book tracing this back to its intellectual roots.
He doesn't just blame social media.
No, he traces it back to Karl Marx, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and the Frankfurt School.
This historical tracing is central to the book's thesis. Riker wants his readers to understand that this isn't a new phenomenon.
It's not just a trend.
It's a century-old architectural blueprint. He traces it back to a very specific intellectual movement known as critical theory.
I think we need to slow down here and really define critical theory. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot in the media,
It does?
but Riker uses it very specifically as the weaponized offspring of Marxist thought. How does he explain it to the reader?
The best way to understand how Riker explains it is to use a simple analogy. Think of traditional theory, like the scientific method or classical liberalism, as trying to understand how a car engine works.
Okay, so you study the parts.
You figure out how combustion creates momentum, and you try to make the engine run more efficiently.
Makes sense.
Critical theory, which was refined in the 1930s by intellectuals of the Frankfurt School like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and Herbert Marcuse.
Right.
It doesn't care how the engine works.
What does it care about?
Critical theory only cares about who gets to drive the car and who is forced to sit in the trunk.
Oh,
It views every single human interaction, every institution, and every tradition exclusively through the lens of power dynamics and oppression.
So, according to Riker, when these theorists fled Germany in the 1930s and embedded themselves in American universities,
Their primary mission wasn't just to critique capitalism economically like classic Marxists.
right, because classic Marxism focused on class struggle, the workers versus the owners.
But in America, the workers were relatively prosperous, so the economic revolution didn't happen.
So the Frankfurt School pivoted.
Exactly. Riker argues they shifted the focus from economics to culture. Their goal became to dismantle all traditional structures.
The nuclear family, religion, objective truth, biological realism.
Because they viewed these traditions as the oppressive mechanisms keeping the egalitarian utopia from taking root.
And the engine driving this continuous dismantling is something called the Hegelian dialectic.
Right. The Hegelian dialectic is essentially the process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
Let's break that down for everyone listening.
Sure. You have an established societal norm, let's say the traditional nuclear family. That is the thesis.
Okay.
Activists then introduce a radical opposing concept, the antithesis.
For example, the idea that the nuclear family is inherently oppressive and should be abolished.
And the resulting conflict between the traditional norm and the radical new idea forces a resolution.
That conflict forces society to compromise and create a new normal, which is the synthesis.
Precisely. Riker argues that this continuous cultural friction is being intentionally engineered.
It's not an accident.
Activists are introducing increasingly radical concepts not because they expect immediate 100% acceptance,
But because the resulting societal friction inevitably drags the center further toward their ideological goals.
they establish a new synthesis and then immediately introduce a new antithesis to pull society even further.
As Riker puts it in the book, tomorrow's radical becomes today's librarian.
It's a slow, deliberate march.
But the most crucial architect in Riker's historical breakdown seems to be Herbert Marcuse.
Yes.
He wrote an essay in 1965 called Repressive Tolerance. And Riker treats this essay as the literal operating manual for modern cancel culture.
It is the absolute cornerstone of his argument regarding how society shifted from tolerance to enforced participation.
What is the core argument of that essay?
In 1965, Marquise argued that in order to achieve true liberation, society must stop tolerating the dominant traditional cultural norms.
So stop tolerating the status quo.
Exactly. In Marcuse's view, allowing conservative, traditional, or right-wing speech actually suppresses freedom because it upholds that oppressive status quo.
So what's the solution?
Marcuse claimed that a genuinely free society must suppress right-wing speech and only tolerate speech that aligns with progressive liberation.
It's an inversion of the classical liberal idea of free speech.
Completely. Marcuse openly advocated for intolerance against movements from the right and tolerance of movements from the left.
And Riker argues that this exact philosophy has jumped from 1960s academic theory directly into the boardrooms, human resources departments, and universities of today.
You are allowed to say anything as long as it aligns with the revolution.
And if you step outside that script, you are purged. The book points to the case of James Damore, the software engineer at Google, to illustrate this.
Back in 2018,
Right. Damore wrote a 12-page internal memo exploring whether biological differences in personality traits might partially explain why fewer women choose to work in certain high-stress tech roles.
and Riker is careful to note that Damore wasn't ranting.
No, he wasn't using slurs. The memo was heavily cited with peer-reviewed psychological and biological studies.
But the response from Google wasn't to debate his scientific citations.
They fired him for perpetuating gender stereotypes.
Riker points out the institutional hypocrisy here. He notes that Google simultaneously runs internal training sessions teaching that male energy is toxic.
And that traditional masculinity is an oppressive social construct.
So they are perfectly fine making broad generalizations about gender, provided it targets men.
Which is pure Marcuse in action, according to Riker.
Only the liberating speech is tolerated. The traditional or biological reality is suppressed as a threat to workplace safety.
Riker takes this even further, looking at the U.S. military. He cites a 2021 directive from the U.S. Army,
warning soldiers that believing in biological sex could be considered a sign of extremism.
specifically the idea that men and women are fundamentally biologically different and have different physical capabilities.
When the military itself, an institution built entirely on physical reality, lethality, and objective metrics, begins treating basic biological realism as a radical threat,
Riker argues you are seeing the total institutional capture by the Frankfurt School's virus.
it's a profound claim. He's asking the reader to recognize that these incredibly dense, esoteric academic theories from the 1930s through the 1960s,
The ideas of Marcuse, or later theorists like Michel Foucault, Judith Butler, and Kimberly Crenshaw.
they haven't just stayed in the sociology departments, they have somehow become the literal operating manuals for modern human resources departments.
So if the academic world birthed these ideas, how did they take over corporate America? That brings us to the next major pillar of Riker's argument, the corporate two.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Riker claims that the massive corporate adoption of these policies isn't happening because Fortune 500 CEOs have suddenly become radical Marxists.
It's happening out of sheer fear, coercion, risk management, and bureaucratic takeover. He describes it as a parasitic infection of the corporate host.
Riker argues that HR departments have fundamentally mutated. Historically, HR was there to protect the company from lawsuits.
Managed benefits, ensured payroll ran smoothly.
Today, he argues, they have become the new thought police. He cites data showing that diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs are now mandatory in 85% of Fortune 500 companies.
But instead of fostering fairness or protecting workers, these bureaucracies act as ideological enforcers.
They prioritize rigid compliance to woke dogma over actual competence, merit, or productivity.
But why would a CEO focused on profit margins allow an ideology that suppresses productivity to take over their company?
That's the million-dollar question.
Riker explains this through the lens of corporate liability shield.
Liability shields.
In an era where a single viral tweet accusing a company of being non-inclusive can wipe billions off its market cap, corporations use DEI departments as a shield.
The CEO doesn't necessarily believe the ideology.
Right. But they fund the DEI department to buy protection from activist mobs.
The irony, Riker points out, is that by funding the DEI department, the CEO empowers an internal bureaucracy that ultimately holds the company hostage.
The DEI department constantly has to find new microaggressions to justify its own budget and existence.
The examples he gives from inside these corporate behemoths sound incredibly dystopian. Let's talk about Salesforce.
You might think a software company's HR department is just running boring diversity workshops once a year.
But Riker says Salesforce instituted pronoun discipline.
They actually have HR auditing internal Slack messages.
If you use the wrong pronoun in a casual chat with a coworker, you are reported to internal inclusion officers.
And the consequences aren't just a slap on the wrist. We're talking demotions, loss of performance bonuses, and mandatory re-education seminars.
Riker quotes a software engineer who told him, "I debug code for a living. Now I have to police my grammar like I'm in Orwell's Ministry of Truth."
It creates an environment of constant low-level paranoia.
And it's not just human auditors manually reading chats. The surveillance is becoming automated.
Riker details a program Amazon allegedly launched in 2021 called Culture Guard.
According to the book, this is an AI tool that actively scans internal corporate emails and documents for non-inclusive language.
If an employee writes a message saying, "We need more manpower on this project," or refers to a new hire as a freshman,
The AI flags it, intercepts the message, and notifies HR.
the employee is subjected to discipline not because they harassed anyone, not because they were malicious, but because they used traditional colloquialisms that don't conform to the new ideological lexicon.
The system demands that you proactively alter your natural speech patterns to demonstrate your compliance. He tells a story about a guy working in logistics in Seattle.
Oh, right, the Slack channel joke.
Yeah, he jokes, "Looks like we're short on bro power this week." 2 days later, he's sitting in mandatory sensitivity training.
No warning, just discipline.
The guy ended up quitting. And the sheer speed at which these policies went from passive suggestions to active enforcement is staggering. Look at the examples from Pfizer and Citigroup.
Riker details how a manager at Pfizer was forced to resign entirely because he used the word guys in a team email.
Just the word, guys. A term used ubiquitously across the English-speaking world.
Exactly, not a slur. But the DEI machine amplified it into a career-ending microaggression, claiming it created an exclusionary atmosphere.
Or look at the Citigroup analyst who was suspended in 2022 simply for sharing a Wall Street Journal op-ed that questioned the effectiveness of affirmative action.
He didn't even write the piece.
He just shared a mainstream article published by one of the most respected financial newspapers in the world. HR told him he violated company values.
Riker zones in on that phrase, violated company values. He argues it is the new ultimate trump card.
It supersedes facts, it supersedes evidence, and it certainly supersedes debate.
It allows corporations to fire high-performing individuals without ever having to justify the firing on the basis of job performance.
Riker points out that this environment creates a profound chilling effect, specifically targeting men, his primary audience, who traditionally value merit, objectivity, and straightforward, unfiltered communication.
And on the flip side, if you want to succeed, compliance is actually gamified.
He notes that LinkedIn now offers activism badges for users who post pro-DEI content.
It turns professional networking into a digital virtue signaling competition, rewarding performance art over actual professional performance.
So what is the macroeconomic result of all this? Riker provides data on the economic cost of this compliance culture.
He cites a 2023 study from MIT Sloan which found that rigid DEI programs actually reduce corporate innovation by 17%.
Wait, a 17% drop in innovation. How does this study draw that correlation?
The mechanics are psychological. When employees are terrified of stepping out of line or using the wrong word, they stop taking risks.
They stop proposing out-of-the-box ideas.
They stop speaking their minds in brainstorming sessions. The intellectual diversity required for innovation is crushed by the demand for ideological uniformity.
He pairs this with a Harvard Business Review study revealing that 58% of men in corporate roles now actively hide their religious, political, or traditional views to avoid being labeled toxic.
Think about that. Over half the male workforce in corporate America is essentially acting out a script of compliance.
Suppressing their genuine thoughts, just to stay employed and feed their families.
Riker calls it a corporate plantation where your competence is entirely secondary to your compliance.
It is a heavy, sweeping accusation against modern capitalism. But Riker pushes the envelope even further when he shifts from the workplace into the home.
Right.
So if the corporate world is enforcing this ideology and local governments are mandating it, where is the ultimate battleground?
According to the book, it's the family.
This brings us to what are undoubtedly the most provocative and emotionally charged arguments in the entire text: the weaponized child and the fall of the father.
Riker does not hold back here. His thesis is that the ultimate endgame of this cultural revolution, going back to the Frankfurt School's goals, is the complete dismantling of the nuclear family.
Why?
Because the traditional family, with a mother, a father, and children insulated by their parents' values, is the greatest bulwark against state control and ideological indoctrination.
It is an independent power structure.
To break society, he argues, you have to break the family. And to break the family, you have to replace the father with the state.
He goes straight after cultural flashpoints like Drag Queen Story Hour or DQSH.
Now, to a lot of people in the mainstream, this is just presented as a quirky, progressive community event promoting reading and tolerance.
But Riker views it through a much darker lens. He sees it as a highly calculated psychological operation aimed directly at toddlers.
He points out the institutional backing of these events. In 2019, the American Library Association officially sanctioned DQSH, calling it a celebration of diversity.
But Riker asks his readers to look at the actual content of what is being presented to children.
He analyzes a video of a performer in Portland named Pizzazz, who is recorded telling 5-year-olds that boys can be princesses too.
Handing out glitter wands.
And explicitly telling them, if you feel like a girl inside, you are a girl.
Riker frames this not as storytelling, but as aggressive gender ideology being smuggled into early childhood development under the guise of basic literacy.
He applies the Frankfurt School lens here again, arguing that this is exactly how you erode tradition, by saturating the culture until the radical becomes routine.
He specifically highlights another DQSH host who goes by the stage name Mistress Velvet.
According to Riker's research, Mistress Velvet proudly identifies as a queer anarchist who actively advocates for the abolition of the nuclear family in their personal writings.
Riker's point to his audience is clear. These performers are not neutral educators reading The Cat in the Hat.
They are ideological foot soldiers, often subsidized by taxpayer dollars, actively working to dismantle biological reality for preschoolers.
And while the children are being targeted with this messaging, the parents, especially the fathers, are being legally and socially sidelined when they try to intervene.
The book details how the state is increasingly acting as the mother, stepping in to override parental rights under the guise of child safety.
He brings up a chilling example regarding Canada's Bill C6.
Yes. According to the book, a father in Toronto was fined $10,000 simply for suggesting that his 14-year-old child see a licensed psychologist about gender dysphoria before pursuing medical transition.
A $10,000 fine for wanting a second medical opinion for a minor. How did the state legally justify that?
Under the framework of the bill, the state categorized the father's caution as conversion therapy and harmful resistance to the child's identity.
The state effectively decreed that it knew better than the father how to protect the child.
It is the criminalization of parental concern.
He gives another harrowing example, this time from Florida, where Child Protective Services launched an investigation into a mother.
Her alleged crime.
She read a Bible story to her child that included the line from Genesis, male and female, he created them.
Under the state's emotional harm statutes, activists reported her, and reading biological essentialism from religious scripture was treated as potential psychological trauma warranting state intervention.
Riker uses this to show that the state is attempting to sever the transmission of traditional values from parent to child.
He also looks to Europe, noting a case in France where a court ruled a father must continue paying child support even after his name was entirely erased from the child's birth certificate.
Replaced with the bureaucratic, gender-neutral term Parent A.
The state erased his identity as a father, stripped him of his patriarchal title, but kept him on the hook as a revenue stream.
That perfectly ties into what Riker calls the fall of masculinity. He argues that being a traditional man is now treated by the medical and psychological establishment as a literal pathology.
This is a massive point for his target demographic. He quotes the American Psychological Association.
In 2021, the APA issued formal guidelines declaring that traditional masculinity is objectively harmful.
Let that sink in for a moment. They weren't just criticizing toxic masculinity, which is a debate about abuse and aggression. They explicitly targeted traditional masculinity.
The drive to protect, provide, be stoic, be self-reliant.
To suppress emotional outbursts in a crisis. The leading psychological body in America labeled these foundational traits as psychologically damaging to men and society.
Riker calls this gynocentrism with a diversity sticker. He argues that society is pathologizing the exact traits that historically built and defended civilization.
And there are professional consequences for men who hold on to these traits.
He gives the example of Andrew Moffat, a primary school teacher in the UK, who was fired in 2022.
Moffat's offense.
He refused to teach gender fluidity to 6-year-olds and insisted on continuing to use the traditional terms mother and father in his classroom.
For believing that parents, not the state, should dictate what their children learn about gender, the school labeled him intolerant and terminated his career.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker introduces a concept he calls the feminist paradox, alongside the theory of male disposability.
This is perhaps the most resonant pillar for his red-pilled audience.
I want to make sure we explain this clearly. What exactly is the feminist paradox, and how does he relate it to male disposability?
Riker is essentially pointing at the physical world. The electrical grid, the sewer systems, the highways, the military.
He's asking his readers to recognize who is physically inside the manholes.
Who is climbing the telephone poles during a hurricane and who is pulling the oil out of the ground?
The feminist paradox, according to Riker, is the deep hypocrisy of a society that relentlessly tears down the patriarchy and complains about toxic masculinity,
while remaining utterly, existentially dependent on the physical infrastructure built, maintained, and protected almost exclusively by men.
Society demands male sacrifice.
Exactly. It requires men to be the firefighters rushing into burning buildings, the miners extracting resources in dangerous conditions, the soldiers dying in foreign wars.
Men are treated as disposable infrastructure.
They are expected to bleed and sweat to keep the machine of civilization running, while simultaneously being lectured by corporate HR departments and university professors that their inherent masculine nature is toxic, oppressive, and needs to be deconstructed.
He is warning that you cannot relentlessly demonize the builders and protectors of a society and expect the society to survive when the lights go out.
It's a sobering argument.
But if this ideology is so counterintuitive, and if it alienates the very people keeping society running, how does it maintain its grip?
How does it enforce this total society-wide compliance?
According to Riker, the answer is found in controlling the language, capturing the media, and setting what he calls the empathy trap.
This is where Riker leans heavily into George Orwell's concept of newspeak from the novel 1984.
Orwell warned that if you can control the language, you control the boundaries of human thought.
If you eliminate the words necessary to conceptualize rebellion or biological reality, then rebellion becomes literally unthinkable.
Riker argues that the woke machine has weaponized language to shrink our conceptual reality and force compliance before a thought is even fully formed.
He has some jaw-dropping examples of this language virus in action.
Let's look at the Seattle therapist he mentions who was hit with a $5,000 fine by the state medical board.
Why? Because the therapist used a client's legal birth name in their private session notes.
The name on the client's actual birth certificate.
By using the legal name instead of the client's newly preferred name, the state declared the therapist had caused psychological harm.
And this extends from legal fines to the standardization of communication.
He points out that the Associated Press, which is the gold standard for journalism formatting globally, officially mandated the use of the singular they for non-binary individuals in all reporting.
Riker argues this forces writers to violate basic grammar and biological reality in the name of ideological appeasement.
It forces the journalist to participate in the celebration of the ideology just to publish an article.
And in Canada, it goes from fines and style guides to the actual criminal code. He points to Canada's Bill C-16, which effectively criminalizes misgendering.
This is a crucial distinction Riker makes. He points out that these aren't just polite requests for respect, they are state-mandated compelled speech.
Historically, tyrannical governments would tell you what you cannot say. They restrict speech.
But compelled speech is a terrifying escalation. It is when the government dictates the exact words you must say to describe reality, regardless of your own conscience, religion, or belief in biology.
If you do not speak the state's words, you are a criminal.
And the media is completely complicit in this enforcement. Riker calls it media activism.
He points out how the media has shifted from objective truth-seeking to blatant ideological enforcement. Take Canada's Bill C-18.
This law essentially forces tech platforms to pay media outlets for linking to their content.
Riker views this as a state-sponsored bailout for legacy media, ensuring that government-approved narratives are financially propped up, acting as a propaganda arm.
But the internal directives of these media companies are even more revealing than the laws.
Yes, he references a leaked 2021 directive from CNN. According to the book, this internal mandate ordered newsrooms to amplify LGBTQ+ voices in 80% of human interest stories.
Think about the sheer scale of that metric, 80%.
It's massive.
That means if a reporter is covering a local bake sale, a high school sports achievement, or a community charity event, they are institutionally mandated to find and inject a specific identity politics angle, regardless of its relevance to the actual event.
Riker says this proves they are no longer journaling events as they happen. They are manufacturing a curated ideological narrative.
The world is being filtered before it reaches your screen.
He also brings up Ronan Farrow's producer at NBC. In 2022, this producer was fired not for incompetence, but because she dared to question the sourcing and facts in a profile about a transgender athlete.
She demanded basic journalistic evidence and corroboration, and for acting like a traditional journalist, she was purged and immediately replaced by someone who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions.
Obedience over accuracy.
But here is where Riker introduces a truly fascinating psychological concept to explain why the public accepts this. He calls it the empathy trap.
I found this section particularly insightful. How does he explain the empathy trap?
He explores how the natural human instinct for compassion has been weaponized to dismantle justice.
He bases it on the rising adoption of the trauma model of crime.
This is the increasingly popular sociological belief that every bad actor, every criminal, every person who commits violence or theft is primarily a victim of systemic trauma.
Therefore, their crimes are essentially cries for help.
Riker argues that this weaponizes empathy into suicidal compassion. It completely shifts the guilt away from the individual who committed the act and places the blame entirely on society.
He uses a staggering example from the BBC to highlight this.
The BBC ran a report referring to a serial shoplifter, a woman who had been arrested 47 times for stealing televisions and selling them on Facebook, as a survivor of systemic poverty.
A survivor. She wasn't surviving a natural disaster or a war zone. She was actively committing dozens of felonies and fencing stolen goods.
And by labeling her a survivor, Riker argues, the media completely absolves her of individual moral agency.
If society is to blame for her actions, then everyone else is guilty and the criminal walks free.
Riker contends that this empathy trap erodes the very foundations of the justice system. It coddles deviants and punishes the enforcers of order.
And who are the traditional enforcers of order and discipline in a society?
Men, fathers, police officers, judges. By invalidating the concept of individual accountability, you invalidate the masculine drive to enforce boundaries, maintain order, and protect the community from predators.
It's another angle of attack on traditional masculinity.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered the workplace, the family, the media, and the justice system. Let's look at where the next generation is being fundamentally shaped.
If the corporate world is enforcing this, and the family unit is being bypassed, where is the ideology actually being planted?
That brings us to the next logical battleground, the classroom.
Yeah.
What does this all mean for schools and universities? How deep does this ideological capture go?
According to Riker, it goes down to the absolute bedrock of how we teach children to think.
He critiques the entire modern education system, pointing out that it has abandoned the classical pursuit of knowledge in favor of political radicalization.
And just like he traced the corporate HR policies back to Marxist, he traces the education collapse directly to the Brazilian Marxist educator Paulo Freire and his highly influential 1968 book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
What was Freire's core argument?
Freire argued that education should not be about a teacher transferring objective information to a student. He viewed that as an oppressive banking model of education,
Instead, he argued that education must be an act of political liberation.
training students to view themselves as oppressed by traditional structures and to view the classroom as a revolutionary cell.
The goal of school isn't to learn math, it's to learn how to dismantle the system.
Riker says this is no longer a fringe theory discussed in graduate seminars. It is the literal blueprint for public education.
He cites UNESCO's 2018 International Guidelines on Sexuality Education, which explicitly instruct educators to bypass hesitant parents and promote the celebration of LGBTQ+ identities as a global best practice.
And the practical application of this in schools is just bizarre, but also deeply revealing of how power operates on campus.
Riker talks about an incident at Oberlin College. Students literally demanded the school ban ketchup from the dining hall.
Why? Because the red color supposedly symbolized blood from colonialism.
And the most important part of that story isn't the absurd demand of the students.
It's the reaction of the administration.
They caved. They banned the ketchup.
It sounds like a joke, but Riker uses it to show that the inmates are running the asylum. The administration is so terrified of being labeled non-inclusive that they will submit to the most irrational demands of the ideological mob.
And when parents try to push back against this radicalization in the lower grades, the system retaliates with terrifying efficiency.
He details the situation in Loudoun County, Virginia.
When parents started attending school board meetings to demand transparency about radical curriculum changes and explicit books in the library, the school district didn't listen to them or treat them as constituents.
Instead, they hired a parent equity liaison.
And what was the function of that role?
According to Riker, the sole purpose of this highly paid administrative position was to monitor, report, and suppress dissenting voices among the parents.
They actively turned the school district into an ideological surveillance zone.
Parents who spoke out were tracked, smeared as domestic terrorists, and silenced.
It's the enforced participation model applied to parenting. You either celebrate the curriculum or you are an enemy of the state.
And universities, which used to be the ultimate sanctuaries for free speech, rigorous debate, and the clash of ideas, are even worse.
Riker calls them indoctrination camps. He reminds us of what happened at Middlebury College.
Charles Murray.
Right. Charles Murray, a Harvard-educated scholar and conservative author, was physically attacked by a mob of students while trying to give a lecture.
Windows were smashed, the faculty actually cheered the mob on, and the administration later praised the students' passion,
No one was expelled.
which sends a crystal clear message to the entire academic community. If your ideas threaten the woke orthodoxy, you don't get a debate, you don't get a microphone, you get a violent mob.
And the institutions will protect the mob, not the speaker. He points to the University of Michigan, where a biology professor was suspended in 2022.
Why? Because in a biology class, while discussing animal mating behaviors, the professor used the terms he and she.
DEI bureaucrats claim that referring to male and female animals reinforced binary oppression.
Riker points out the absolute absurdity of policing the biological realities of fruit flies and lions to appease gender theorists.
When biology itself is deemed offensive, you have left the realm of education and entered the realm of religious dogma.
He even notes that Harvard Law School, an institution literally built to revere the First Amendment and train the nation's top legal minds, canceled the talk on free speech because student activists threatened to shut it down.
They surrendered before the battle even began.
But Riker also connects the education collapse to broader national policies, specifically demographics and immigration.
He argues that the woke machine uses mass immigration as a lever to actively dismantle Western culture and humiliate native populations.
This is a highly controversial section of the book, but crucial to understanding his appeal to the manosphere. Riker claims there is a deliberate double standard designed to humiliate native Western populations.
He points to a public school in Berlin that canceled its Father's Day celebrations.
The school claimed that migrant parents from deeply patriarchal cultures complained that honoring Western fathers glorified patriarchal oppression and offended them.
So the school canceled Father's Day but left Mother's Day completely untouched.
Exactly. Riker views this as the state indulging foreign patriarchal norms while simultaneously punishing native traditional masculinity. It's a calculated humiliation.
He also brings up a French history teacher who was suspended simply for showing a documentary about the Enlightenment philosopher Voltaire.
A student union accused the teacher of promoting white supremacy by discussing the origins of Western civil liberties and free speech.
Riker argues the West is being forced to apologize for its own cultural foundations and achievements.
He also highlights demographic phenomena in Denmark and Norway, which he calls reverse assimilation.
Native children in these countries are adopting aggressive, hypermasculine behaviors and slang from migrant peers.
But Riker argues they aren't doing this out of admiration for the new cultures. They are doing it out of a sheer survival instinct on the playground.
Because their own native culture has stripped them of the right to be strong, to defend themselves, and to embody traditional masculinity.
All of this builds to Riker's ultimate diagnosis of the modern era. Society is paralyzed by the law of the mob.
Cancel culture isn't just a byproduct of social media algorithms. It is a highly effective, decentralized mechanism of social control that punishes excellence, enforces mediocrity, and terrifies men into total submission.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground. We've gone from the Frankfurt School in the 1930s, conceptualizing the destruction of tradition, to AI scanning your emails for the word manpower.
To the state fining fathers for trying to protect their children. It is a heavy, relentless, and systematic critique of the modern world.
But the book doesn't just end on doom and gloom.
Right. As we move toward the end of our discussion, we need to look at the author's proposed solution.
Riker has a final chapter dedicated to reclaiming civilization.
How does he suggest his readers, these men who feel entirely alienated, fight back against this enforced celebration and what he calls the silence tax?
Riker's solution is built on two unyielding pillars: absolute noncompliance and the rapid construction of parallel institutions.
He urges his readers to stop funding your own destruction.
His message is blunt. If a corporation demands you wear a pronoun pin, refuse.
If they mandate you attend a drag show or a DEI struggle session, do not show up.
Accept the professional costs, get fired if you must, but do not surrender your dignity by speaking words you know to be false.
He's advocating for a mass stoic withdrawal of consent. But he also knows you need an economy to survive, which is why he champions the rise of alternative platforms that refuse to bow to censorship.
Exactly. He points to Rumble, the video hosting platform, noting that it hit 70 million users simply by allowing free debate without shutting down voices that dissent from gender ideology.
He talks about networks like Frontline Truth,
A live stream news network that bypasses corporate sponsors and HR diversity committees entirely, relying on direct subscriber support to report raw facts to millions of viewers.
He even looks at international models for how the state can push back, praising Poland's subsidized traditional family media.
These are government-supported networks of podcasts, radio stations, and newspapers that actively promote traditional marriage, fatherhood, and national loyalty.
Riker argues this proves there is a massive, untapped hunger for content that validates biological reality rather than constantly apologizing for it.
Riker's ultimate message to his male readers is a call to stoic resilience. Raise strong sons.
Teach them that virtue is found in character, truth, and biological reality, not in corporate compliance.
Refuse to apologize for being a man and stop feeding the woke machine with your silence and your self-censorship.
It's a powerful, uncompromising rallying cry for his audience.
It really is.
But before we wrap up completely, I want to toss it over to you for a final provocative thought. Based on everything we've unpacked from Riker's text today, the corporate surveillance, the academic capture, the rewriting of language, What is a question the listener should walk away chewing on?
This raises an important question, one that builds on Riker's fears but looks toward the immediate future. If social compliance is increasingly enforced by digital surveillance, like Amazon's AI auditing your emails in the workplace, or the social credit style activism badges on LinkedIn, or digital banking systems that can freeze your assets for hate speech, at what point does the infrastructure of convenience become a permanent prison?
Wow.
Our phones, our corporate software, our digital banking. If these systems are fully captured by the ideologies Riker describes, they become the permanent lock on the door of enforced celebration. If the culture ever attempts to swing back toward traditionalism, or even just a neutral live and let live attitude, will the technology that underpins our daily lives even allow for dissent? Or will the algorithm simply erase you before you can even articulate your resistance?
That is an incredibly chilling thought to end on. If the system is rigged at the code level, how do you even opt out? We want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on this incredibly intense, impartial exploration of Conrad Riker's perspective on modern cultural history.
We've covered a lot of controversial heavy ground today.
We really have. And we hope this deep dive has given you a comprehensive understanding of the architectural blueprints shaping this side of the cultural divide.
Absolutely.
Before you go, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you never miss a deep dive.
And if this conversation sparked your curiosity, or if you want to read these arguments in their full, unfiltered context, you absolutely need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook.
The arguments are dense, they are provocative, and they are worth examining directly.
And if you want to hear more directly from the author, you can follow him at Conrad and Riker on Substack.
He also has his website, conradandriker.com, and you can find him on Twitter at Conrad Riker, and on YouTube at Conrad and Riker.
Thank you again for being with us.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.